friends, it's KT. All Roughcut jokes aside, I did in fact shell out 62 United States dollars for this monstrosity, the Nerf Elite 2.0 Flipshots Flip 32. It's a lot of money. But after watching the Flip 8 and especially the Flip 16 kind of fall apart under review, I was excited to see early reviews showing the Flip 32 actually functioning the way it was promised. And I had to try it out for myself. And it is a monstrosity. It's complicated, it's gimmicky, it's heavy. In fact, it's so heavy, I wanted to put some numbers to the heaviness. So I popped it on a scale alongside some other high capacity off-the-shelf options. And even with the batteries and the flywheelers, the Flip 32 comes in at over double the weight of all these other setups. Even though the Dart Zone blasters actually hold more darts in their drums, almost twice as many in the case of the Tomahawk. Now, aesthetically, this might be my favorite Nerf brand blaster in the current generation of releases. The Dragon Power series is gorgeous, but with this having these faux mechanical details and bright colors, it's really a return to the Nerf look I remember from my childhood in a lot of ways. Now, before we get into the operation of the blaster, I want to talk about assembly and disassembly. These two sets of barrels clip onto the sides. They're mirror images of each other, so each one is marked with a shape, a triangle for one and a square for the other, so you have to put them in the correct places. Before you do that, I would recommend removing this one screw from the very front of the blaster. Because of the way the barrels attach to the blaster, they can't be removed from the outside once they're on, and they cover up this one screw hole. So you can't open up the blaster once the barrels are on to take the barrels off. Removing this one screw before attaching the barrels means you can open the blaster up in the future, and then you can remove the barrels using screwdrivers or spudgers. The blaster doesn't seem to have any clips holding it together, no solvent welds, no glue holding it shut. So as long as you take this screw out first before you assemble it, you should have no problem getting it open. And it was surprisingly easy to both open and to close it again. Be careful not to let this spring in the rotation handle lock pop out when you're taking the handle apart. Firing an operation is interesting. There's a lot going on here. First, the prime is lever action, comparable to blasters like the Nerf Zombie Strike Sling Fire and the Roblox Adopt Me Bees blaster. Compared to a blaster like the Sling Fire, the priming stroke is somewhat shorter. Most kids playing with these blasters can't support the weight of the whole blaster with one hand while they use the lever, so it's potentially better for smaller users. Of course, the trade-off is smaller plunger volume since the plunger can't travel as far accordingly. Now, every time you prime the blaster, you actually prime two separate plunger tubes, one for each side of the blaster. From here, you can pull the two-stage trigger. A light pull fires a single dart. You can fire both of them one at a time. A harder pull fires both simultaneously. This is a lot easier to use than a lot of the other double-stage triggers that I've seen on Roughcuts or on the barrel break. It's a lot easier to get that single dart fire controllably without accidentally firing both. But it's still easy to pull hard and fire both at once. It's actually a nice piece of versatility to have in gameplay. Now, while I joke about all the Flipshots blasters being some quantity of Roughcuts or Wardens in a variety of trenchcoats, it's worth noting that the air restrictors and the barrels do seem to actually use the same tapered geometry of the barrels from those blasters. It's just hidden under the larger shroud of this rotating barrel piece. Now, once you fired your first 16 darts and emptied all the barrels in the front, the pump grip can be used to flip the barrels around to access the 16 darts on the back. Unlike the disastrous pump grip on the Flip 16, the Flip 32 has a lever lock that keeps the grip from moving when you don't want it to, and it does a really good job of making sure that the barrels stay aligned. It's definitely possible to overflip the barrels if you're super aggressive, but attempting to operate the flipping mechanism again results in a super short stroke that fixes the alignment immediately. So I ran this over my chronograph with both the included Elite darts as well as some pretty fresh Adventure Force waffles. This thing is exceedingly difficult to chronograph because it has 32 barrels and the two-stage trigger fires from one side and then from the other, so you have to remember which dart you're on to get a precise shot. The performance isn't great, averaging around 50 feet per second, with a few outliers above and below with both dart types. The chronograph numbers completely line up with my expectations. The starting FPS is significantly lower than the standard we're used to from Nerf blasters because the air has to make multiple sharp turns inside the blaster to get from the plunger tube to the darts. After that, the 8-way air restrictors introduced more twists and turns, and as usual, some barrels get better performance than others. The darts landed in a pretty reasonable grouping, again with expected results. They were centered around 30 to 35 feet out, with the absolute farthest shot a little over 40 feet. This was firing pretty level over the chronograph. The Adventure Force waffles were centered pretty well. The Elite darts splayed out every which direction, 10 to 15 feet off target. Now let's talk about what happens when you actually play with the blaster. For me, the feel of this blaster is a little confusing. A lot of that 4 pounds of weight is centered in the front of the blaster, despite the pretty small grip offered on the rotation mechanism. Meanwhile, the firing grip is pretty comfortable in my hands, although after just a few minutes, the front weight hurts the joint between my trigger and ring fingers, unless I make a conscious effort to put all the weight on the front of the blaster, which is a lot to ask, especially of a casual player or a kid who's just trying to have fun. I passed this off to my 10-year-old to see what would happen. He immediately noticed the extra weight. Of course, his experience with the grips was the opposite of mine. The rotation grip fits him pretty well. The firing grip is a little bit big for him. He wasn't able to prime the blaster the normal way because the stock is too long for him to leverage it against his shoulder while priming, so he had to hold the blaster up to prime it each time. This is pretty obviously exhausting, and the reward, a 30-foot shot, was pretty disheartening.
How does it feel?
Clunky, very heavy, and whenever I fire a dart, you see I aimed right at it, and then it sort of left and right and went around it.
I think that's just the darts, because I just left the Elite darts in there.
Yeah,
It's probably better with waffles,
this
but...
thing's really heavy.
Yeah, you think...
think it'd be harder to flip it than it is to prime it.
Okay, so just to recap, it's heavy.
Yeah.
It's hard to prime. I see you holding it up over your shoulder. Is that just because the front is so heavy?
Yes.
It's a lot to carry. Yeah.
I can't do this. It's really... I can't prime
Because it kind of leans
like
forward. Cause
I can't prime it like that.
I got about 4 minutes of firing footage from him before he dropped it in the grass. He just tired of carrying it around. So in the end, while I'm really glad that they finally did get the flipping mechanism working correctly in this blaster, and it is a very cool gimmick, I'm not really sure who the audience is for this. It's way too heavy and clunky for kids. They advertise 8+ on the box, but my 10-year-old was tired of it after only a few minutes. I can't imagine an 8-year-old who will happily run around with this thing for an entire play date, let alone a longer game. Did I mention, by the way, that this thing is $62? That's an okay price per ounce, I guess, but a pretty bad price per minute of playtime. I wouldn't recommend this for anyone under the age of 12, just because of the strength needed to use it, and even then I wouldn't expect more than about a half an hour of play with it. Make sure they have something else lighter to use too. Meanwhile, as an adult, at 50 feet per second, it just shoots too soft to be of any use. I haven't tried modding it, but all those right angles are going to hurt the efficiency of anything that you try to do to add power to this blaster. And with a mechanism this complicated, there's a lot that can go wrong. I can think of one possible use for this blaster being the one adult who's playing Nerf with kids at a party being the one to carry around the giant, impressive-looking blaster, you don't have to be battle effective, but you do want to keep cleaning darts up off the field as much as possible, and sticking them into these rear load chambers is very, very convenient. But even though the Flip Mech is impressive, I can play that role just about as well with an Adventure Force Villainator, and that's $20. So ultimately, even though it does work as promised, I just can't recommend the Flip 32. At a cheaper price, it could be a fun gimmick blaster worth adding to your collection, but for this pretty of a penny, it's gonna be a pass. So what do you think about this thing, or about gimmicky blasters in general? Do you know a kid who could carry this around for a half-hour game? Let me know down in the comments. I would love to hear from you. And now that my arms are tired from carrying this thing around, I really hope that this video was helpful and entertaining. If so, please help me out by hitting the like button and even subscribing to the channel for more family-focused foam-flinging content. That's a lot of alliteration. Have a great week, and I'll see you on the field, but not with this thing. This is held together with electrical tape. I could have designed a new 3D printed part, I guess, to hold 4 rough cuts together, but I don't know. There we go. There we go. That's the real Flip Mech. Look at that. Ooh, let's try that. Yeah, there we go. Oh wait, that's prime. No, it's not. It's broken. What did I do? Oh, okay, there we go. Here we go. Ugh.